Picture this. One ordinary morning, you wake up and realize something has quietly changed. The nation right beside you, your closest partner, your largest trade counterpart, has just taken control of the most critical resource on Earth. Not crude oil, not precious metals, something far more decisive. A resource every electric vehicle, every mobile device, every unmanned combat system, and every national power network will rely on for the next 100 years. Now take that idea further. That nation is Canada, and the United States, long seen as the dominant force, is no longer driving the car. It is sitting beside the driver. This is not speculation about the future. It is already unfolding, and those who fail to notice may miss one of the most significant economic transformations of the 21st century. There is a single figure that demands attention: $50 trillion. That is the projected size of the worldwide battery and energy storage sector across the next 3 decades. To put it in perspective, the entire GDP of the United States today stands near $27 trillion. The battery economy is not just large. It surpasses anything previously seen. And at this very moment, Canada is positioning itself at the core of this emerging system in a way that remains widely underestimated. For generations, North America's energy narrative was straightforward. The United States controlled oil, natural gas, refining capacity, pipeline networks, and the geopolitical strength to direct global energy flows. Canada supplied resources, but America dictated influence. This relationship defined the continent for over a century. But that structure is shifting rapidly. Fossil fuels are not disappearing overnight, yet the direction is unmistakable. Nations that act now, securing materials, building infrastructure, and locking in supply chains for the next era, will hold decisive leverage decades from today. So what exactly does Canada possess? Start with fundamentals. Canada holds some of the largest reserves of critical minerals on the planet: lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, graphite. These are the essential building blocks behind every lithium-ion battery ever produced. And these resources are not hidden in isolated pockets. Ontario alone contains vast nickel reserves that global manufacturers are racing to secure. Quebec is developing lithium projects, attracting capital from South Korea, Japan, and Germany. Meanwhile, the Northwest Territories and Nunavut contain cobalt and rare earth deposits that have been quietly evaluated for years. Canada is not merely rich in resources. It holds the exact combination needed for the battery age, at precisely the right time. But the real turning point lies elsewhere. Unlike past resource economies, Canada is not planning to simply extract and export. That model, where value is created elsewhere, is ending. Instead, Canada is building an entire domestic ecosystem: mining, refining, cell production, battery assembly, recycling. Every link in the chain is being constructed internally. Government policy, private capital, and international partnerships are aligning in a way rarely seen before. Concrete examples make this clear. Volkswagen committed to a massive battery gigafactory in St. Thomas, Ontario. This is not just a multi-billion-dollar investment creating thousands of jobs. It is a signal to the global manufacturing community that Canada is strategically positioned for the battery era. When a company like Volkswagen selects Canada over the United States, Mexico, or Eastern Europe, it reflects calculated analysis, access to minerals, availability of clean electricity, skilled workforce, and political reliability. Soon after, Stellantis partnered with LG Energy Solution to launch another major facility in Windsor, Ontario. Then Honda revealed a large-scale electric vehicle supply chain investment spanning multiple provinces. These decisions are not isolated. Corporate leaders across Germany, Japan, and South Korea are studying maps of mineral deposits, energy costs, and logistics networks. Again and again, they reach the same conclusion: Canada offers the optimal conditions. This development carries serious implications for the United States. For the first time in modern history, the United States faces meaningful dependence on a neighboring country. Its ambitions in electric vehicles are aggressive. The Inflation Reduction Act injected hundreds of billions into clean energy and EV production. Automakers like Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis are rapidly transitioning their fleets. But there is a critical limitation. The United States lacks sufficient quantities of key minerals, along with the processing infrastructure needed to sustain its ambitions. As a result, it must rely on imports. A significant portion of those materials will come from Canada. This alters a long-standing power dynamic. Historically, the United States held the dominant position. Capital flowed north. Demand dictated Canadian production. Policy decisions in Washington shaped economic outcomes in Ottawa. In the battery era, those leverage points are shifting. The minerals are located in Canada, processing facilities are being built in Canada, gigafactories are rising in Canada, and the United States cannot simply manufacture its way out of a supply shortage. The situation extends beyond economics into geopolitics. China currently controls between 60% and 80% of the global battery supply chain, from extraction to refining to production. This concentration has triggered concern across the United States, the European Union, Japan, and South Korea. Each of these powers is seeking to reduce dependence on Beijing. The race to build an alternative system is one of the defining economic contests of our time. And Canada, with its vast mineral reserves, stable governance, trade relationships, and clean energy capabilities, stands at the center of this effort. This is no longer just a business story, it is a matter of national security. When the Pentagon begins emphasizing battery supply chains, when NATO incorporates critical minerals into strategic planning, when the G7 prioritizes diversification away from Chinese control, the significance becomes undeniable. What makes this moment even more striking is the speed of change. 5 years ago, few Canadians could name even 3 battery critical minerals. Today, competition for mining rights in the Canadian Shield is intensifying. Provincial governments are rewriting regulations to accelerate approvals. Federal programs are channeling investment into battery supply chains. A national critical mineral strategy is underway. Frameworks are being developed to ensure Indigenous communities share in the economic benefits. Canada is awakening to its potential, and that potential is immense. Yet recognizing opportunity is only the first step. Turning it into lasting power is far more complex. The next decade will determine the outcome. One major challenge stands out: processing capacity. Raw minerals have limited value compared to refined materials ready for battery production. The highest value lies not in extraction, but in transformation. Converting ore into battery-grade lithium hydroxide, nickel sulfate, and cobalt sulfate is where economic strength is built. At present, most of this processing occurs in China. That is the bottleneck the rest of the world is attempting to overcome. Canada has an opportunity to become the primary processing hub for Western economies, but only if it moves decisively. Projects are already advancing. Facilities using hydrometallurgical methods are being developed to refine nickel and cobalt domestically. Lithium processing plants are progressing in Quebec and Ontario. Federal incentives, including tax credits and loan guarantees, are designed to attract investment into this crucial stage. The reasoning is straightforward. Every stage of processing retained within Canada increases domestic value, supports employment, and strengthens industrial expertise. This could mark the manufacturing revival Canada has sought for decades, with the battery sector serving as the catalyst. There is another advantage that amplifies everything: clean energy. Battery production demands enormous amounts of electricity. The origin of that energy matters not only for cost efficiency, but also for environmental commitments. Automakers and technology firms are under pressure to reduce carbon emissions, making clean power a decisive factor in where they invest. Canada's energy profile, heavily supported by low-emission sources, provides a powerful edge in attracting future battery manufacturing. The convergence of mineral wealth, processing ambition, and clean energy positions Canada uniquely in the unfolding global transformation. The shift is real, the stakes are enormous, and the outcome is still being written. A battery produced using electricity generated from coal cannot be considered clean. It contradicts the entire purpose. Canada, however, operates on a very different foundation. Roughly 83% of its power grid comes from non-emitting sources. Hydroelectric energy flows from Quebec and British Columbia. Nuclear power anchors Ontario. Wind and solar capacity are expanding steadily across the prairie regions. This is not a temporary edge. It is a structural advantage that very few nations can replicate. Infrastructure like this cannot be assembled overnight. Either a country already possesses it, or it does not. Canada does. What makes this story even more compelling is that it is not built on a single strength. It is a layered advantage. Each layer reinforces the next. Critical minerals, domestic processing capability, clean electricity, political stability, strong trade access. Individually, each factor matters. Combined, they form a system that is extraordinarily difficult for competitors to match. That is why the current wave of investment entering Canada is only the beginning of something much larger. There's another dimension that cannot be ignored, one that carries both ethical weight and practical consequences. A large share of Canada's key mineral deposits lies on or near lands connected to Indigenous communities. Historically, resource extraction often excluded these communities from economic gains while leaving them to deal with environmental and social impacts. That approach is no longer viable, not morally and not economically. Projects that move forward without Indigenous approval face resistance. Legal disputes emerge. Timelines stretch. Costs escalate, sometimes by billions of dollars and years of delay. Stability becomes impossible under those conditions. Canada is now working to establish new models centered on shared ownership and revenue participation in battery mineral developments. When implemented effectively, these frameworks transform local communities into partners. Support replaces opposition. Development becomes sustainable. Countries that succeed in building genuine partnerships will gain faster approvals and more reliable project pipelines. Canada not only has strong motivation to achieve this, but also the evolving legal and political structures required to make it work. Now comes the question that matters most at the individual level. What does all of this mean for everyday citizens? It is easy to discuss trillion-dollar industries and global power shifts in abstract terms. But the real issue is whether the wealth created will actually benefit the population, or whether it will be absorbed by multinational corporations, foreign investors, and government systems that fail to translate gains into tangible improvements. This is the crossroads. The phenomenon known as the resource curse is real. Some nations discover vast natural wealth, yet end up worse off. Corruption rises, other sectors weaken, long-term development stalls because institutions and human capital fail to keep pace. Canada enters this moment with safeguards. Strong institutions, a highly educated workforce, a federal structure that spreads economic activity across regions. But these strengths do not guarantee success. They must be reinforced through deliberate decisions. Policies will matter. Requirements for domestic participation in battery supply chains, workforce training programs to prepare people for new industries, tax systems that ensure a fair share of value is retained, strategic investment of revenues into infrastructure, education, and healthcare rather than short-term political incentives. History offers examples. Norway stands out, particularly through its sovereign wealth fund. That success was not accidental. It resulted from disciplined, long-term planning rather than short-term thinking. Canada now faces a similar opportunity in the battery era. It could follow a path that transforms resource wealth into lasting national prosperity, but that outcome depends on political determination and public engagement. Citizens must understand what is at stake and demand responsible action. Step back and examine the broader picture. Globally, around $3 trillion is being invested annually into the energy transition. That figure continues to rise. At the center of this transformation lies the battery economy. Canada holds a unique position within it. The country possesses the minerals. It has access to clean energy. It is building industrial capacity. It occupies a favorable geopolitical position outside of China's control. Investment capital is already arriving. Gigafactories are under construction. Trade agreements are being secured. The United States needs these resources. Europe needs them. Asia needs them as well. For the first time in many decades, Canada is not the nation searching for what others have. Instead, it has become the source that others depend on. That shift is profound. The way Canada manages this moment will shape its future for generations. How citizens respond, how policies are formed, how decisions are debated, all of it will determine whether this opportunity is fully realized. This is not a hypothetical situation. It is not a distant projection. It is the current reality of the global economy. And Canada stands directly at its center. The United States faces a fundamental constraint. It does not possess sufficient quantities of key minerals, nor are those resources located in optimal regions or supported by adequate refining infrastructure to sustain its domestic battery sector. As a result, it must rely on external supply. A meaningful share of those materials is sourced, or will increasingly be sourced, from Canada. This reality alters a long-standing hierarchy. For generations, most Americans have viewed their country as the dominant force in the partnership with Canada. Capital moved northward. Demand from the United States dictated the pace of Canadian extraction. Policy decisions made in Washington shaped economic outcomes across the border. But the battery era is rewriting those rules. The leverage has shifted. Critical minerals are concentrated in Canadian territory. Processing facilities are being constructed within Canada. Gigafactories are rising across Canadian provinces. Meanwhile, the United States, despite its immense industrial base and military strength, cannot simply overcome a shortage of raw materials through determination alone. There is a deeper layer to this transformation, one rooted in geopolitics. China currently holds control over roughly 60% to 80% of the global battery supply chain. This dominance spans mining operations, refining capacity, and cell production. Such concentration has triggered serious concern among major global powers, including the United States, the European Union, Japan, and South Korea. Each of these economies aims to build a clean energy future without falling into dependency on Beijing. This has ignited a worldwide race to establish an alternative network, one that operates independently of Chinese control. It is one of the defining economic rivalries of this era. And within that contest, Canada stands as a critical piece of the puzzle. Its vast mineral wealth, stable political environment, strong trade ties with Western economies, and low-emission energy grid place it in a uniquely strategic position. This is no longer just about markets or industry. It has become a matter of national defense. When discussions within the Pentagon begin to focus on battery supply chains, when NATO integrates critical minerals into its strategic calculations, when G7 nations align around the need to reduce reliance on China, the narrative shifts. Canada's natural resources are no longer just commodities. They become instruments of geopolitical influence. What makes this moment even more striking is the pace of change. Just 5 years ago, most Canadians would have struggled to identify even 3 essential battery minerals. Today, competition for mining rights across the Canadian Shield has intensified dramatically. Provincial authorities are revising regulatory systems to accelerate project approvals. Federal funding programs are targeting the battery ecosystem with precision. A national strategy centered on critical minerals is now in motion. At the same time, frameworks are being designed to ensure that Indigenous communities located near these resources become participants in the wealth generated, rather than observers watching it leave their land. This is a country becoming fully aware of its strategic assets. And those assets are extraordinary. Yet recognizing potential is only the beginning. Converting that potential into long-term economic strength and geopolitical influence is a far more complex challenge. The next 10 years will define the outcome. One issue stands out immediately: processing capacity. Raw materials extracted from the ground hold limited value compared to refined products ready for battery manufacturing. The true economic advantage lies not in mining, but in transformation. Converting ore into battery-grade lithium hydroxide, nickel sulfate, cobalt sulfate, and other high-purity materials is where real value is created. Currently, most of this processing occurs within China. That concentration represents a bottleneck the rest of the world is actively trying to overcome. Canada has a clear opportunity to emerge as the primary processing hub for Western nations, but success depends on decisive action. Several initiatives are already underway. Advanced hydrometallurgical facilities are being developed to refine nickel and cobalt domestically. Lithium processing plants are progressing in Quebec and Ontario. The federal government is supporting these efforts through tax incentives and loan guarantees designed to attract midstream industrial investment. The logic is straightforward. Every stage of refinement completed within Canada adds value to the domestic economy, generates employment, and strengthens industrial capability. This could represent the manufacturing revival Canada has pursued for decades, with the battery sector acting as the driving force. Now consider energy, another decisive factor. Battery production requires vast amounts of electricity. Producing materials at scale is extremely energy intensive. Companies building gigafactories pay close attention to energy sources, not only for cost efficiency, but also because their clients, including automakers and technology firms, are under pressure to meet strict carbon reduction targets. A battery produced using coal-based electricity undermines its own environmental purpose. Canada offers a different model. Approximately 83% of its electricity supply comes from non-emitting sources. Hydropower dominates in Quebec and British Columbia. Nuclear energy supports Ontario. Wind and solar generation continue to expand across the prairie regions. This is not an advantage that can be quickly replicated. It is structural, deeply embedded in infrastructure built over decades. Countries either possess it or they do not. Canada does. And this is where the full picture comes into focus. Canada's strength does not rely on a single factor. It is a combination of interconnected advantages: mineral resources, processing ambition, clean energy, political stability, global trade access. Each element reinforces the others, creating a system that is exceptionally difficult to replicate elsewhere. That is why the surge of investment entering Canada should be viewed as the early phase of a much larger transformation. There's also a critical social dimension to consider. A significant portion of Canada's mineral wealth is located on or near Indigenous lands. Historically, resource development often excluded these communities from economic benefits, while imposing environmental and social burdens. That approach is no longer acceptable. Projects that proceed without Indigenous involvement encounter resistance. Legal challenges arise. Timelines stretch, costs increase, sometimes dramatically. Without partnership, stability cannot be achieved. Canada is now working to establish new frameworks that emphasize shared ownership and revenue distribution in battery mineral projects. When these systems function effectively, they transform local communities into supporters of responsible development. Nations that succeed in building authentic partnerships will benefit from faster approvals and more reliable project pipelines. Canada has both the incentive and the evolving institutional framework to achieve this. This brings us to a fundamental question. What does all of this mean for ordinary Canadians? It is easy to focus on trillion-dollar markets and global influence. But the real issue is whether the wealth generated will improve everyday lives, or whether it will be absorbed by multinational corporations, foreign investors, and government systems that fail to deliver meaningful benefits. This is the turning point. The resource curse is a well-documented phenomenon. Countries that discover vast natural wealth sometimes experience negative outcomes. Corruption increases, other industries weaken. Long-term growth stagnates due to insufficient investment in human capital and institutional quality. Canada begins from a position of strength. Its institutions are robust. Its workforce is highly educated. Its federal system distributes economic activity across regions. But these advantages are not guarantees. They must be reinforced through deliberate policy decisions. Requirements for domestic participation in supply chains workforce training programs tailored to new industries, tax systems designed to capture fair value, strategic reinvestment into infrastructure, education, and healthcare instead of short-term political gains. There are successful models to learn from. Norway is often cited, particularly for its sovereign wealth fund. Its success came from disciplined long-term planning, not short-term political calculations. Canada has a similar opportunity in the battery era. It could transform its natural resources into lasting national prosperity. But that outcome depends on political resolve and public awareness. Citizens must recognize what is at stake and demand effective governance. Now step back and look at the global context. Each year, approximately $3 trillion is being invested into the energy transition, and that figure continues to grow. At the core of this transformation lies the battery economy. Canada occupies a unique position within it. It holds the raw materials. It has access to clean energy. It is building industrial capacity. It stands as a key geopolitical player outside of China's sphere of control. Investment is already arriving. Gigafactories are under construction. Trade agreements are being secured. The United States depends on these resources. Europe does as well. Asia is no different. For the first time in decades, Canada is not the country seeking what others possess. Instead, it has become the nation that others rely upon. That is a profound shift in global dynamics. How Canada manages this opportunity will shape its future for generations. The choices made, the policies implemented, the level of public engagement, all of it will determine whether this moment becomes a lasting advantage. This is not a rehearsal. It is not a distant possibility. It is the economic reality unfolding right now. And Canada stands at the very center of it. If this perspective has changed how you see Canada's role in the global system, take a moment to reflect and share your though.